WCW's Halloween Havoc pay-per-views have always been a source of rich wrestling history, especially for critics like myself, because those shows would give us some great moments, also some bad moments, also some moments that seem great, ironically, in hindsight, when they are at the time, objectively bad. But this is the show that got the whole ball rolling on that one. I'm talking about WCW Halloween Havoc 1989, settling the score from October 28th at the Philadelphia Civic Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This show was nominated by Adam Vanderplum, Gentleman Chris Santo, and Steven Slater 007 over on patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. 7,300 folks in attendance here, 175,000 pay-per-view buys makes this the most bought pay-per-view for the company that year, even beating Starrcade by about 45,000. Jim Ross and Bob Caudle on commentary. Gordon Solie is backstage on one spooky set for interviews, and on the other spooky set, here's WCW's newest colleague, the future voice of the WXO, Chris Cruz. Also, I'm sorry, but I gotta complain about the lighting in these interview sets. They are not optimally lit, let's just say, because I don't know if they're trying to go for spooky or just unprofessionally done, because you got a lot of just giant shadows being cast on wrestlers when they hold their hands up, or the wrestlers immediately behind them are just shrouded in darkness. It's not a very good look. There's better ways to do this and make it look scary and spooky, if that's what you were going for. In our opening match, the unbeaten Z-Man making his WCW pay-per-view debut, taking on Captain Mike Rotunda, who's still representing the Varsity Club. The Z-Man is booed as much as Rotunda here, even though he's supposed to be the face, I think. The match begins with the Captain powdering a couple times early on, hits a cheap shot out of a rope break, starts fighting dirty. Z-Man remains resilient with a sunset flip. Sort of a slow-going match here. The crowd begins to get restless. Captain Mike with the head scissors while grabbing the ropes, very sneaky until the ref catches him. Mike using Z-Man's momentum against him, dumping him outside, drops him on the top rope, and after a lot of selling, finally suplexes him into the ring. We get an abdominal stretch with the rope assist, but come on, how does Patrick not see that at first? Goes for a dropkick, but Z-Man avoids it, starts his comeback. Mike goes for his trademark cross-body off the rebound, but Zank rolls through it and covers for the win. I give it 2 stars out of 5, kind of an underwhelming opening match here. I know that both men, in particular the Z-Man, are capable of a lot of more high-impact, high-speed kind of action here, but we don't see it in this one. A lot of stalling, a lot of shtick. That's not the kind of vibe you should have for an opening match. I'm a firm believer in the idea that the opening match should be a lot faster paced to get the crowd awake. Chris Cruz backstage with Bruno Sammartino, the guest referee for tonight's main event. That's right, folks, Bruno Sammartino, the former longtime stalwart of the WWF. He left the company the previous year, and he's decrying the Federation for their use of vulgar storylines and steroids and wrestling and everything. So after abandoning the circus of the World Wrestling Federation, he's going to be the main event for the Thunderdome cage match happening later tonight. Wrestling. Up next, the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette and Steve Williams take on the Samoan SWAT team and the Samoan Savage with the Big Kahuna, Sir Oliver Humperdinck. Babyface Midnight, okay, fine, take it or leave it, but babyface Cornette, sorry, hard pass. And this is as somebody who is a longtime fan of Cornette's as a manager. I don't think I'm being controversial when I say that his face run is not very good compared to his heel stuff. I mean, when he first turned face against Paulie Dangerously before this, yeah, that worked. But then, after a while, the babyface run of Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express just kind of it fizzled out really fast. They're not good as faces. They're much better as heels. And honestly, it's really hard to be a face manager. Unless you're Jimmy Hart or Arnold Skaaland, not a whole lot of great babyface managers in wrestling history, so that's another kind of hurdle against them. And in storyline mode, at least, Jim is in a bit of a pickle right now. He's caught between two worlds with the Midnight Express and the Dynamic Dudes, but more on those guys later. Samoan SWAT team is Fatu and Samu, and Samoan Savage is the Tonga Kid. Fatu gets things started by just shouting a lot. We get a lot of gaga in this one, too. The fighting breaks out. We're close to losing control a number of times. Bobby Eaton sells the hell out of Samu's chops. Samu and the rest of the Samoans, though, bump a lot for the faces themselves. The crowd's electric for this. Dr. Death just mowing over his opponents. I like Bobby Eaton's leaping clothesline when his opponent comes off the ropes. It feels like a move I would have loved to have done when I wrestled. Eaton goes for a bulldog, but the Samoan Savage just throws him crotch first into the ring post. He gets beaten up on the outside. Big splat on the concrete. Eaton gets worked over as the Big Kahuna looks on approvingly. TK bites Bobby's forearm and leaves teeth marks. Goes for a Vader bomb, but Eaton puts the knees up. Hot tag to Dr. Death, who goes wild, throws TK into the other two. Eaton goes for a DDT or a neckbreaker. Doesn't look great. Lane goes for a cover, but Hump distracts the ref. Lane is then thrown face first into JC's racket. Jim falls off the apron. The Samoans capitalize and win. I give it 2.5 stars out of 5. The match was a bit more exciting than the previous one with Tom Zank and Mike Rotunda, but this one also had a lot of stalling, more so than I think should be necessary for 6 guys, the talent of what were in the ring there. I thought the story was still good, more tension building between Midnight Express and Jim Cornette. This honestly should have been the opener. Gordon Solie backstage with Terry Funk and Gary Hart. Terry looking real jacked, baby. Hart says there is no quitting in the J-Tex Corporation, and Mr. J himself will be at ringside for the main event. But unless it's this guy in the suit at the beginning of the match we never see again, well, we don't see him either. Terry Funk says they're going to start a new dance craze in Philadelphia, the 10,000-volt boogie and the fried chicken, when they shove Flair's face into the electrified steel of the Thunderdome. Remember that point. Up next, the Cuban assassin, also known in some circles as Fidel Sierra, takes on Wildfire Tommy Rich. Rich is a former NWA World's Champion, and he's being heralded now as one of the big comeback players of '89 after spending a few years away from WCW in relative obscurity, which I guess is just WCW code for Memphis. We see Sierra do a rebound crossbody early in the match, and I'm like, wait, isn't that Rotunda's move? Tommy goes for a sunset flip over the top and does not get all of it, and the crowd turns on them forevermore after this thing. The Philly fans are unforgiving. Tommy works the arm with a series of arm drags. Assassin does some of the same thing. The crowd is booing this. They're chanting boring. Not even Fidel's shouting can get them riled up. At this point, I myself am shouting at the computer, do a fucking high spot. The most exciting part of the match so far is Tommy's bump into the ropes after taking a knee. Rich gets some hope spots, but the crowd is just tuned out. Fidel goes for the crossbody again, misses it. Rich hits his finisher, the Thez press. He wins, the fans shit all over this thing, and Wildfire hightails it out of there. I give it a half star out of 5. You know, this match started out okay enough, and then when they botched the sunset flip, the fans never forgive them for that. But I think worse than the fans reacting to that was how the wrestlers failed to respond to that feedback. That's something where you would try and do something to kind of quicken the pace a little bit, get the fans to forget the botch, and just kind of get them back into it. I'm not entirely sure if this is an issue of, the Southern wrestling style WCW not jiving with what we see, in the Northeast. I think that's part of it, certainly, but I think it's more than just a Southern style thing. I think they're just working the arm way too much and not getting out of that first gear. Gordon Solie is backstage with the fabulous Freebirds. They put over their upcoming opponents, the Dynamic Dudes, which is a pretty tough task, but they say those kids are about to find out why they're fabulous. On we go now to the NWA World Tag Title match as the fabulous Freebirds, Michael P.S. Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin, defend against the Dynamic Dudes of Johnny Ace and Shane Douglas, who are accompanied by Jim Cornette. It's a continuing part of the Cornette saga right now, where he actually got the Dynamic Dudes a title shot over the Midnight Express. So young Johnny Ace and Shane Douglas are a terrible new tag team that come out to some unholy hybrid of Beach Boys and Beastie Boys ripoff songs. They wear bright neon colors, they bring skateboards to the ring, but never ride them. Even on NXT right now, Cora Jade skateboards the 10 feet from the beginning of the entrance to the ring. So they're given a gimmick that is not authentically them in any way possible. It was basically formed in a focus group. They already look like box office poison. Then when combined with the garish babyface manager Jim Cornette in their corner, it makes you wonder how the hell they were meant to be babyfaces in this or any era. Oh yeah, and the best part about this thing, the Philly crowd fucking hates these guys. Standing boovation the entirety of this match for them. At least with Tommy Rich, the fans gave him a bit of a chance before tearing him down. These guys, they have no such patience. They also had a gimmick where they'd pull a kid out from the front row. Johnny would put his hat on the kid, they'd pose, the kid looked frightened and confused, then they'd plot the kid back to the front row. Here they totally missed what camera to play to. Amazing. Meanwhile, the Freebirds come out to the fucking Lynyrd Skynyrd Freebird guitar solo. How epic is that? And so the crowd naturally, whether they love the Freebirds organically or just the fact they're not the Dynamic Dudes, they love the Freebirds here. It's also funny because if you watch this on mute and have no knowledge of these teams, they're equally goofy looking, and it feels like a level playing field that way. And how does Jim Ross get these exciting young wrestlers over on commentary? These kids finish their education before becoming wrestlers, which is so important. Kids stay in school. Like, okay, it's a fine message to be sure, but it's a hard sell to get wrestling fans to cheer for wrestlers because they stayed in school. That wasn't even one of Hogan's demandments. Shane's working with a hurt arm here, which seems to be the story of his entire career. The first sequence Shane and Hayes do, it gets botched. They recover with a neck breaker, which looks like shit. Shane is so bad in this match. Thank God for Johnny Ace trying to right this ship. The dudes show off their double team moves, which includes this pointless double leapfrog. The fans are not impressed. Johnny has Garvin in a headlock. He fights off Hayes at the same time, even hitting the headlock, head scissors combo. The fans don't like it, but honestly, he's just trying his best here. Back to the headlock we go. Massive "you suck" chants. P.S. Hayes decks Ace in the mouth, which gets the biggest pop of the match. Garvin keeps cheap shotting Ace on the outside, and the fans love it. Garvin goes for a DDT, but Shane with the rare block. Shane with a series of drop kicks to both men. Ace the double clothesline. They go for the wipeout, but Hayes trips up Shane, which allows Jimmy Jarm Gavin to pin and win. I give it 1 star out of 5. The only things I found entertaining in this matchup were the Freebirds and the crowd, because the dynamic dudes just fucking sucked in this thing. Like, the fans didn't give them a chance from the word go, but they didn't do themselves any favors either, because they were just totally lost, deer in headlights, screwing things up constantly in this thing. It was not a good look for Douglas or Ace. It's good to know that like both of them would go on to do like better things with their careers, even though this partnership between the two of them and the gimmick they were given seemed destined to ruin their careers. By the way, Jim Cornette would betray the dynamic dudes shortly after this. He would go pick the side of the Midnight Express. They'd all turn heel again, and then the dudes just kind of like went off into the ether and did their own thing after a while. Chris Cruz backstage with the Steiner brothers. Scott is a relative newcomer to the NWA, joining his older brother Rick in the tag team rankings. He talks about how they have no game plan for this mysterious team of doom, but it's their game, their rules, their ball game. They're playing their game in the ball game. His promo is the same babbling nonsense you kind of come to expect from him, but this is not Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. This is like rookie Scott Steiner, so it just sounds as dumb as his brother was being booked at the time.
Because when there's no rules, no anything, you're in our ball game, and you're playing our game.
Speaking of which, Rick's promo mostly consisted of him just doing, "Hey, doom, it's finished." It's like more unintelligible than normal. What is happening here? All you need is like a VHS tracking filter on the top of this thing and some jump cuts. It looks like a Tim and Eric sketch. On we go to the Steiner brothers taking on the debuting team of Doom, who are accompanied by Woman. So what's causing all this? Well, some time ago, Nancy Sullivan debuted for WCW as Robin Green, this kind of nerdy looking fan who's taken a liking to Rick Steiner, giving him gifts. They go on dates and such, but then Green basically transforming into the alluring Woman, who is a devious pretty lady using her looks to get what she wants. She used Rick and Scott to get her foot in the door in WCW and has brought Doom, the masked team of Ron Simmons and Butch Reed, who are not named yet, to take the Steiners out. It's a pretty wild way to debut a character. Like, we've seen wrestlers and personalities debut as fans, like jumping the railing or whatever, but I can't recall a situation like this where it's like a disguise or the beginning of some metamorphosis like what we see with Woman here. It's very interesting. Also, I want to point out props to WCW for using lots of copyrighted songs as themes at this time. The Steiners come out to Welcome to the Jungle, Doom come out to Her Strut by Bob Seger, we heard Freebird earlier in the show, and so on. The fight begins, you get double German suplexes right out the gate, double clotheslines, the crowd is completely woken up for this. Simmons, who for now is Doom number 1, is getting worked over by Rick and Scott. Steiner lines to both opponents. Rick blocks a suplex, gives one of his own, a big flying clothesline by Scott. A jawbreaker to Rick allows for Doom to begin taking over. We get an exchange with Scott and Reed, Doom number 2. Woman yells at her team to get those Steiners. Well, yeah, they're working on it. Scott's beaten up on the outside, more cheap shotting and choking and double teaming back in the ring. We get the hot tag fake out with Rick as Scott gets a double pile driver but somehow kicks out. Scott gets a break, the tag to Rick and Simmons, Rick throwing his weight around, a Frankensteiner by Scott. Woman is on the apron to distract Rick, ends up slipping a foreign object in Ron's mask. He headbutts Rick to knock him out, but shouldn't that also break his own face? Anyway, Doom wins dirty in their debut. I give it 3 stars out of 5. This match definitely broke me and the crowd out of the doldrums of some of the other matches we've seen so far in this show, and it was a pretty impressive debut for Reed and Simmons under this gimmick. And as someone who like didn't really know how Doom debuted or how Woman came into WCW, doing the research for this and watching some of the old Saturday nights building up to this show was very fascinating to watch. Gordon Solie backstage with U.S. champion Lex Luger. He tells Brian Pillman this is the real deal, no more playing around in exhibitions. Says he's the champion of the 90s. Solie asks him how many times he's been champion. Luger says he's champion for as long as he wants to be. Solie wraps it up by saying he's been champion more than once, which means he can be beat. Damn, Gordon throwing that shade. On we go now to the U.S. title match as 3-time champion Lex Luger defends against flying Brian Pillman. Pillman looking to make a name for himself in WCW, challenging Luger for a title shot, which Lex has been repeatedly repeatedly ducking on TV. Pillman comes out to Def Leppard with some cheerleaders. What an entrance. A lot of sizing up early in the match. Brian comes back with a tackle and a flurry of offense which sends the champ powdering. More fast offense from Pillman, the crossbody, the arm drag and so forth, but Luger fights back with his size and his power. Pillman's still outpacing him though. Brian keeps fighting, goes for a top rope splash but gets none of it. Luger flapjacks Pillman into the air and takes over. Asserting his will here, a lot of big clubbing blows and a stalling suplex. Lex fights out of a sunset flip, goes for a clothesline but he throws himself out of the ring. Pillman with the corner punches but he gets stopped. A top rope sunset flip by Pillman but a kick out. Air Pillman connects but Luger gets his foot on the ropes during the pin. Brian with a missile dropkick off the top. He gets none of it but Luger bumps for him anyway and JR still calls it that he missed. Luger with a stun gun on Pillman, the cover and the win. I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. It's my pick for one of the better matches of the evening, and I would say, unless somebody is going to come and correct me in the comments section, I think this is the highest rated Lex Luger match we've seen so far on the Classic Review. I think it told a great story. Luger bumping the way he did at the end of that missile dropkick that he was supposed to not bump for, or maybe he was, or maybe it was supposed to be contact, who knows. That part was unfortunate, but I think everything else they did kind of overcame that. Chris Cruz with the Road Warriors ahead of their match against the Skyscrapers. Paul Ellering literally standing in the shadows. Hawk asks Ellering, who builds buildings? Who destroys buildings? Why, people do. And wouldn't you know it, they're a couple of people too. On we go to this grudge match as the unbeaten Skyscrapers take on the Road Warriors. Sid Vicious and Dan Spivey accompanied by Theodore R. Long, two new big bad dudes looking to fight another pair of big bad dudes. It's billed as the present meeting the future of wrestling, and here Animal and Hawk are actually portrayed as underdogs. Nice entrance for the Road Warriors. They come out with pyro and on a hydraulic lift. We got big meaty men bumping meat, as one might say. Spivey takes a few extra licks to go down, first by Animal, then by Hawk. Sid gets in the ring, gets knocked down a couple of times as well. We got a test of strength with Sid and Hawk. Hawk wins that exchange, but then Sid with a kip up out of a head scissors? Never seen him do that before. JR says on commentary that Sid is a guy that Ric Flair is going to have to look over his shoulder for in a couple of years. So even at this point when Sid is relatively young in his WCW career, still kind of being pegged as a future top guy, which is pretty impressive. And speaking of Ric Flair, here's Sid with a helicopter. The Scrapers work over Hawk in the ring. We get the fake out spot again. 2 matches in a row. Come on now. Animal tags in for real moments later. He's a house of fire. Teddy Long gets in the ring. Ellering tries to intercept, but Long's got a large metal gold painted key for some reason, and he decks Paul with it. Spivey hits Hawk with the key. The match ends in a DQ. The Baddies use the key for a bit, but the Road Warriors get it back. Hawk hits them a couple times, and the heels leave to fight another day. I give it 1.5 stars out of 5. You know, for a Haas fight, it was okay. For the first time meeting with these two teams, I think it was, just okay. But the finish was a little disappointing. You want to see something more definitive than that. And so, obviously, this feud is not done yet. But yeah, that was an okay Haas fight, but bogged down a little bit by the finish. We're backstage with Sting, Ric Flair, and their corner man, Ole Anderson. So when's Ole going to throw in the towel for his team? Ole says there's no way he's throwing in that towel, but Gary Hart will do it for his team. Ric Flair says he and Sting stand together for a cause to take out Terry Funk and the Great Muta. Sting shouts about how he loves being different, and well, this main event is certainly that. It's the first ever Thunderdome cage match, no relation to the WWE concept of the same name from last year, as Sting and Ric Flair take on Terry Funk and the Great Muta. And as I mentioned, your special guest referee, Bruno Sammartino, a Philadelphia legend and a former WWF champion. Back at Wrestle War in May, Terry Funk attacked Flair after challenging him for the world title. He joined the J-Tex Corporation, led by devious Gary Hart, in his mission to destroy Flair for the gold. At the Great American Bash, Flair's former rival Sting joined in to help him out. There was an infamous incident in September when Funk tried to suffocate Flair with a plastic shopping bag. They're really up in the ante here because this is not any normal match. It is a Thunderdome cage match, what they specify is electrified. They use the word electrified many, many, many times as the build for this match goes on. It's important to remember that. Oh, and by the way, not only is this a steel cage tag team match, not only is Bruno Sammartino the guest referee, not only is this cage allegedly electrified, but also the match can only end when one of the team's designated terminators, their cornermen, so it would be Ole Anderson in the case of the babyfaces, Gary Hart in case of the heels, throws in the towel for their team. This match there's a lot of shit going on here. And here's the Thunderdome, the partially domed cage that would be repurposed a couple of times, most notably for the Chamber of Horrors match 2 years later. We see Funk climbing this electrified cage, not being electrocuted, a sign of things to come. A piece of the set dressing does catch fire from the pyro. Muta puts it out with the green mist. Classic. So it's a no DQ match, but we do get traditional tag rules, which is weird. Moments into the match, Funk thrown repeatedly into the cage, no electrocution. We are seeing constant contact with this thing, and no one's selling anything. There's no like buzzing sound, there's no lights. They have totally just thrown away this entire thing they spent the entire show building toward. Flair and Sting take turns going after Muta. We finally get some stuff with all 4 guys in the ring now. Sting with some running bulldogs, nice teamwork with the baby faces. It's just a big brawl at this point, and there are multiple times in the match where they kind of stop what they're doing just to climb the cage for no reason, because they're rarely doing any kind of moves off them, and it's not electrified, so they don't gotta sell anything, but it's just like, oh, time to go up the cage now. And like they also kind of change their story, like, oh, the top of the cage, the partially domed top, is the electrified part, which also is not true. There's a part where Flair and Funk are doing some great work high up, but the set dressing on the cage blocks some of the shot. Then Flair Tarzan swings off a rope and into Funk. Hell yeah. Sting and Funk up top, another Tarzan swing as Flair puts Muta in the figure 4 for a bit. Funk ties Sting's leg to the cage with some rope. Now Flair's in trouble, a double pile driver to him. Sting escapes thanks to Ole Anderson, then takes a huge dive off the cage wall and back into the ring. Wow. Muta climbs to the top for some reason. JR warns he may become fried wonton because of the quote-unquote electrified cage top. Just a reminder, wontons are a form of Chinese food, not Japanese, which the great Muta is. The figure 4 on Funk. Sting with some splashes for good measure, but Gary Hart refusing to throw in the towel. Muta enters the ring, and rather than just breaking up the hold himself, he decides to start shit with Bruno for no reason, and Bruno decks him. The cornermen get in the ring. Ole hits Hart, whose towel flies out of his hand. Bruno sees it and calls the match. Flair and Sting win. I give this one 2.5 stars out of 5. I will give them extra points for the use of the Tarzan rope and the swinging they did in that thing. Sting's crazy bump off the side of the cage in the ring was awesome. And I liked the finish with the managers getting involved, like Gary Hart's sell when he throws the towel up in the air getting punched. That was hilarious. But this match is like the definition of overpromising and underdelivering. I mean, they promised you multiple times in this show that cage is electrified. And whether or not they thought they could pull it off, they didn't. The cage was not electrified, and they had to scramble. Oh, the top of the cage is electrified, but that played no factor into the match either. And like I mentioned, the whole idea of Muta deciding to attack Bruno for no reason instead of just stopping the hold, which is the more important thing, that was just their excuse to get Bruno to throw hands, which they could have got to a different way without having this complete illogical thing of Muta attacking the referee for no real reason. Like I said, they promised a lot, they didn't give you a lot. It was a confusing brawl where they just kind of go up and down the cage periodically. I don't think anyone even bleeds in this thing. I saw some blood on Bruno's shirt. It might have just been Muta. But for Flair to be in a steel cage match and to not get color, that was a huge shock to me. Funk and Flair would make up for this in a big way the following month at Clash of the Champions 9 with their epic Awesome I Quit match. And then 1 month after that, the Horsemen would reform with Sting joining them for a bit, and we all know how that one turned out. My grade for the inaugural WCW Halloween Havoc is a C-. A pretty disappointing show, I think, all told. I went into this one not really knowing what to expect, because I know what happens in the main events of future Halloween Havocs and some of the wild, crazy shit we see, the good and the bad, throughout the history of the show, but I didn't remember what made this particular show shitty, and now I do after having seen it. Like, there were a couple of good matches, like okay matches on this show, but what really, a bigger takeaway for me was, like, again, like the Tommy Rich Fidel Sierra match, the Dynamic Dudes totally getting just destroyed by the crowd in Philadelphia. This just felt like a lot of the WCW style failing to translate to those Northeastern fans. Like I said, that is part of it, but I think a lot of it was just like the wrestling itself wasn't that exciting. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review, folks. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments section below. Now, next time on the Classic Reviews segment, we are covering the Invasion storyline 20 years later, and Survivor Series 2001 was next up, but a few people asked me, what about the UK pay-per-view during this time, Rebellion 2001? I wanted to include it in this arc, but unfortunately, no one on Patreon had requested Rebellion 01 before I cut off requests for pay-per-views and stuff for the classics. However, there is a loophole. I've discovered a loophole that will allow me to actually cover it after all. So the next time in 2 weeks, we will be bumping Survivor Series 01 back to later in November, but for now we're looking at Rebellion 2001. But until then, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.